What's going on, YouTube? This video is going to be about this Teak Veneer Bar top that I've done. And the purpose of the video, make no mistake, this is not an instructional video like I'm some authority on woodworking, because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know anything about woodworking. I'm a horrible carpenter. Everything I've ever done has either gone in the garbage or led to me going to the emergency room. So before you get in the comment section and say, hey, you're not supposed to do that like that, or you can't do, you did that the wrong way. I know. I already know that. You don't need to remind me, okay? So just relax, put the keyboard down, and keep the cruel, demeaning comments to yourself. So my intentions for this video are for it to be more kind of demonstrative of what someone can do who has, a limited amount of woodworking experience or knowledge. And I think it was a relatively straightforward and easy project to do. And so I'm going to show you the steps that I did. So hopefully that maybe if you're someone like me, you're like, hey, Mano29, I'm a fucking idiot too. I don't know how to do anything with veneer. Well, I'm going to show you how I did it and how it turned out, and maybe it'll give you inspiration to try some veneer projects on your own. So an important comment I should preface this with is that, hang on a second. Okay, the baby's awake, hang on. Okay, so an important comment I should preface this with is I'm not starting totally from scratch. I'll show you what the bar looked like before. I'm just kind of resurfacing this. So before, I'm starting on second base. So before you hit the thumbs down and say, hey, you made it seem like you built the whole bar yourself. Well, it's like, no, it used to look like this. It was very dated, kind of this 1970s look with the vinyl and whatnot. So we stripped it all down. Well, we've done this kind of a nice shiplap, which is in style in the back. And so I had the basic, elements of the bar was already constructed. I just kind of am resurfacing it. I put the stone veneer on, and I'm just going to show you the how I've resurfaced the top itself and did a bit of veneer work. Now there are a couple crucial items that kind of goes without saying that you need for a project like this. Obviously, safety glasses are something you're going to want to use. Take the 10 seconds, put them on. It's not worth, a chip of wood or something flicking up into your eye. The second thing, and this is extremely critical for any woodworking project, especially if it's going to go on to YouTube, is you need some nice woodworking music. There we go. That's nice. All right, let's get started.
All right, so we're back a little earlier in the process. See, I've already got the stone veneer done on here, but now I've got starting with what was the bare plywood substrate that I was using that I'm going to apply the veneer onto. So the first step, my understanding is you want to make sure you've got a very smooth surface for the veneer to adhere to. So if you've got any imperfections in the wood, you want to use some wood filler to fill out. I had some pretty big gouges in it. I used some wood filler to fill those in, and then you want to apply a layer of water-based, or a couple coats rather, of water-based polyurethane. That way you'll have a nice smooth surface for the veneer to adhere properly to. So once you've got your substrate sanded down and smooth and prepared, ready to have the veneer put onto it, basically what I'm doing now is I've got the veneer out and I'm going to be trimming it to size for the bar top and the sides as well. One thing you'll want to do is you'll notice when you get it shipped, it's going to be coiled up in a package, and it's like this is a 2x8 length of the veneer, and it's kind of spooled up, and so when you take it to the package it kind of unfurls it, but it's got a very significant bend to it. So what you'll want to do is pull it out of there and have it, I kind of stuck it under my bookcase here and then I weighted it down at the other end as well to flatten it out, let it acclimate to your local humidity and temperature and all that, and then that way it kind of flattens out and it'll be easier to work with once it's done that. So when you need to trim the veneer, as I do here, because I've got this angle here, you can use just a good sharp blade such as this, any X-Acto knife or box cutter or what have you. So I've got my veneer pieces cut here now for the bar top and the front surface here as well. And you're going to want to cut it a little bit wider than the actual surface, and then you can trim away the excess after with the router. I'll show you how that's done in a bit. So I've got this little piece of MDF here just as a guide, just because I want, when I'm going to peel off the backing of the adhesive, I'm going to start sticking this on there. I want it to be kind of even and straight as I move along the front edge of the bar. So the veneer that I ordered, I paid extra to have this 3M glue added onto it right out of the box. So that to me was the more convenient option. I experimented with some cheap veneer that I bought from Lowe's that doesn't even have the paper backing at all. And you have to use a contact cement. Contact cement really smells quite strong, and then you've got to do the coats on each side. This seemed like an easier option. Well, I guess we'll find out if it's easier. It might be, it could be a whole catastrophe. We'll see. Now it's PSA veneer. PSA is pressure sensitive, so I'm going to be applying it on starting here, and then using this piece of wood here to kind of apply pressure to really work the glue onto the substrate. The way I figure I'll do it here is to really try to apply as much pressure as I can and just work in some maybe small sections here at first, just to get that initial tack on there, and then just pull away some more of the backing and continue to press it on. So the thinking is that you want to really apply a lot of pressure because you don't want there to be any air bubbles or anything in there, and really want the adhesive to stick down onto that substrate. Okay, so I've made several passes applying as much pressure as possible over the entirety of the surface, trying to make sure that that adhesive is able to do its job the way it's supposed to. And now I'm ready to trim this front portion, and that's where I'm going to use this. I've got this relatively inexpensive router I got from Home Depot. It's kind of a, I think they call it a laminate trimmer maybe? I'm not sure. Anyways, I got this flush bit. You can see here, I'll zoom in. Bit here with the bearing so that I can make a nice straight flush cut. I almost forgot to put on my safety goggles. Guys, it's not just a cliche, it's your eyesight. Something you will cherish for the rest of your life. Take the 2 seconds and put on the goggles.
My eyes, the goggles do nothing.
It's not true. It's not true. The goggles do something. Now, something I've noticed with the adhesive backing that comes on the veneer is that it will leave this kind of these little gummy kind of filaments of adhesive kind of along the edge, and also just a few imperfections from the cut. I like to use a piece of 220 grit sandpaper around this little my handy dandy block here. He's the real star of the show today, and just use that to kind of sand off some of the excess that might be left over there, so it's nice and flush for when I put the top layer down. So I've got the front piece on there, it's stuck on there, sanded down the edges. I've wiped everything down and cleaned off all the dust. That's one thing I forgot to mention initially, is before you lay the veneer onto the substrate, it's really good to make sure that it's not only sanded, but that you really wipe it off and there isn't any dust that might prevent the proper adhesion to the substrate. I just use kind of like a shop towel type thing, just make sure everything's very clean. Alright, so I'm more or less done laying down the veneer onto the bar top. It's all been, the edges have all been sanded, and the seams are all have come together quite nicely. I'm so far very happy with it, and I love the look of teak just naturally on its own, but I do need to add some kind of finish to it just to properly protect it and really bring out the grain. So for me, the dilemma as far as choice of finish goes is that I really like the kind of natural look of the wood, and so that would lend itself more to an oil-based finish. But I also needed to protect the surface somewhat because it is a bar top, table surface, and so it might see some wear and tear. So it does need some kind of durability. But on the other hand, I don't want to have that really thick, kind of glossy shellac look that to me is just like having a nice couch and putting a plastic covering over it. It kind of ruins the craftsmanship of what you're trying to protect. So I'm going to experiment here with a couple different, I've got a couple different products, and basically my plan is I've got a couple test pieces I've made here, just adding some scrap veneer onto a scrap piece of plywood. And what I'm going to do is add a little bit to each piece and a couple coats, try to replicate what I would do to the bar top surface, and then that way I'll have a better idea of what exactly I want to choose to go with before finally doing it. Okay, so I've done my samples. I've made up my mind on what I want to use for the bar top itself, and I'm just going to go with just straight up Danish oil. I think it does the best job of making the color of the grain really pop, and so I had made some of my own kind of little custom mixes of stuff, hoping that I would maybe stumble on some kind of interesting recipe. And I don't know what I'm doing. Those, as much as I would like for that to be, it'd be a nice story to say, oh, I came up with this secret little blend, and then this would be some awesome recipe that I would hand down generation after generation. Really, they look pretty crappy. It made it kind of cloudy and dull, as were just the straight Danish oil. The Watco Danish oil seems to make it nice, clear and natural, and really makes the grain nice contrast between the shades of color within the grain. So that is what I'm deciding to go with, and then maybe I'll add a little bit of a wipe-on poly after, just for extra protection after I've added multiple coats of the Danish oil. Okay, so one of the main appeals of doing the oil finish is the simplicity. As far as I can tell, it's just a rub-on application, so I'm just going to use this kind of shop towel and add some of the oil to it and kind of rub it along into the grain. And we're going to do the whole surface like that, let it sit for about 6 hours or so, and then afterwards I'm going to add a second coat, and my procedure for that's going to be a little bit different. One thing I really love, I've been watching a lot of videos researching how I was going to do this project, and there's something about watching the transformation from unfinished bare wood into the once the product or oil is added and the grain just kind of pops, and it really kind of reminds me of as I like to do video work, obviously, if you follow my channel at all. And one of the things I love doing with video is when I take the raw image out of the camera and then color grade it afterwards in post-production. There's something very satisfying in tweaking the colors and adjusting it, making it in a way that is satisfying to your liking. And so there was something that kind of reminds me about adding the finish to the wood grain that is kind of similar, some kind of parallel to color grading it. Okay, so it's a day later. I let this first coat dry. So for the second coat and for the next subsequent, maybe, I'm not sure how many coats I'm going to do. We'll see, maybe 4 or 5 even. Some of the videos I see, depending on what the type of wood and the finish is, you could do up to 8 or 9 coats or what have you. But for the next coat anyways, I'm going to be doing wet sanding the Danish oil into the surface. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to use the shop towel to dab the oil on, but I think I'm going to be a little bit more generous with the amount that I put on here now. And then I'm going to use a kind of sanding sponge here that's a very, very fine grit, and kind of work it in. And my understanding is what happens is as you sand it down, it puts the dust, kind of everything kind of congeals into the small little crevices, and it really seals and fills in the grain so that you get a nice solid kind of unpitted surface. Okay, so I've repeated that process of the wet sanding about 8 times or so. So it's about a week and a half later. Basically, once a day I would come downstairs and apply another coat. So I'm ready to add the last coat. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use this finishing pad and give it a kind of a light scrubbing, make sure there's no dust nibs or high spots at all. And I'm just going to add one last coat of Danish oil and not wet sand it, just kind of plainly wipe it on and then allow that to cure for maybe a week or so is my understanding, and then I'll add the polyurethane to wipe on.
This is now becoming what is likely the most long and boring YouTube video in the history of YouTube videos, and for that I apologize, but we're at the last step. I'm going to be adding this wipe-on poly by Minwax over top of the Danish oil finish just to add an extra layer of protection. And the one critical thing, according to my research, if you're going to be doing that, is to ensure that you let the Danish oil cure for at least 72 hours, maybe even upwards of a week would be ideal. And that's what I did. This has been sitting for about a week and a half. And so now I'm going to apply that wipe-on poly. Maybe I'll add a coat or two of that just to add a little extra durability to the surface.
Okay, so that pretty much wraps things up here. A few final thoughts. I really like the way it turned out. I love the look. I think the feel and aesthetic of it is exactly what I was looking for and hoping that it would turn out as, so I'm not disappointed there. One concern I do have is the long-term practicality and longevity of it. I've already seen a couple nicks and scratches, and of course being in a house with a small child and that kind of thing, who knows how well this will hold up to any kind of abuse over the long term. Hopefully this video was of some use to some of you to get some inspiration for your own veneer or DIY projects. I hope it was. If you have experience working with veneer or have a project that you'd like to share, by all means mention it in the comments. If you're even still watching, I highly doubt there's really anybody watching. I could probably take my pants off right now and the YouTube wouldn't even flag it because no one would even know.